Captain Yura had been mapping stars for 20 years, but she had never seen anything like this before. She sat in her small office aboard the Vorthan exploration ship, staring at dozens of galactic charts spread across her desk. Every single map showed the same impossible thing. They all just stopped at the edge of human space. It wasn't like looking at unexplored territory. Those areas were marked clearly with warnings about unknown dangers or simply labeled as unmapped regions. This was different. The maps didn't fade out or show question marks. They ended with clean, sharp lines, as if someone had taken scissors and cut away everything beyond human borders. Yura rubbed her tired eyes and pulled up another chart on her computer screen. This one was from the Trade Federation, used by merchant ships across the galaxy. Same thing. The map showed detailed trade routes, space stations, and planet information right up to human territory. Then nothing. Just empty white space. She opened another file, this one from the Military Defense Network. Surely they would have some information about what lay beyond human borders. But no. Even the military maps stopped at that same invisible line. It was as if the entire galaxy had agreed that whatever existed in human space simply didn't need to be documented. The pattern was too perfect to be an accident. Yura had mapped thousands of star systems, and she knew that cartographers never worked with such precision when they were simply missing information. When explorers didn't know what was out there, they drew rough estimates or left gaps with notes promising future surveys. They didn't create perfect geometric boundaries that matched across every single chart. Excited by her discovery, Yura gathered her evidence and requested a meeting with Director Vex, her immediate supervisor. She had worked under Vex for 8 years and trusted him to understand the significance of what she had found. The next morning, Yura spread her charts across Vex's desk and explained her findings. She pointed out the consistent boundaries, the complete lack of information beyond human territory, and the suspicious uniformity across different mapping organizations. Vex listened silently, his expression growing more uncomfortable with each piece of evidence Yura presented. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at the maps with what looked like worry rather than curiosity. "This is very interesting work, Captain," he finally said, but his voice lacked enthusiasm. "However, I think you're reading too much into standard cartographic practices. Different species have different mapping conventions." Yura frowned. "But Director, these aren't different conventions. These are identical boundaries across completely separate organizations. The Trade Federation and Military Defense Network don't even share mapping data. Yet their charts end at exactly the same coordinates." Vex began gathering up the charts, his movements quick and nervous. "I appreciate your thorough analysis, Captain, but I'm reassigning you to the Outer Rim survey project. We need experienced cartographers, working on expanding our knowledge of the frontier regions." The Outer Rim project was routine work, mapping empty space and cataloging lifeless rocks. It was the kind of assignment given to cartographers who had made mistakes or needed to be kept busy with unimportant tasks. "Director, I think this discovery could be significant for galactic navigation and trade," Yura protested. "The matter is closed, Captain," Vex said firmly, sealing her charts in a security folder. "Report to Bay 7 tomorrow morning for your new assignment." As Yura left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that her discovery had frightened her supervisor more than it had interested him. 3 weeks into her boring Outer Rim assignment, Yura found herself docked at Nexus Station for refueling. The massive trading hub buzzed with activity as merchants from dozens of different species bought, sold, and exchanged goods from across the galaxy. If anyone would know about the mapping mystery, it would be the traders who spent their lives traveling between worlds. Yura made her way to the station's central marketplace, keeping her military uniform hidden under a plain grey coat. She didn't want to seem official while asking questions that might make people nervous. The marketplace was a chaos of sounds and smells, with vendors hawking everything from rare crystals to exotic foods. She approached a Calorian merchant named Jorik, who was selling navigation equipment. His booth displayed star charts, compass devices, and route calculators, exactly the kind of trader who would know about mapping problems. "Excuse me," Yura said casually. "I'm looking for charts of the human territory region. Do you have anything?" "That shows trade routes through there." Jorik's four eyes blinked rapidly, and he stepped back from his display. Human space? Why would you want to go there? Just curious about the area, Yura replied, trying to sound innocent. I heard there might be good trading opportunities. The merchant shook his head vigorously. No, no, no. My government has very strict rules about human territory. We don't go there, ever. It's completely forbidden for Calorian ships to enter that region. Forbidden? Why? But Jorik had already turned away, busying himself with rearranging his merchandise. I can't talk about it. Try someone else. Yura moved on to the next vendor, a Centauri captain named Dex, who specialized in long-range shipping contracts. He was older than most traders, with the weathered look of someone who had seen the entire galaxy. Human space? Dex chuckled when she asked the same question. Smart species don't cross certain lines, young one. That's how we stay in business. For 40 years like I have. But what's the actual danger, Yura pressed? Pirates, hostile aliens, navigation hazards? Dex's expression grew serious. Look, I've hauled cargo to war zones, through asteroid fields and past black holes. I've dealt with space pirates, angry governments, and creatures that could eat my ship. But human territory? That's different. That's a line you just don't cross. Different how? The old captain glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. Kid, there are some things in this galaxy that are bigger than trade profits. Some boundaries exist for reasons that go way beyond making money. Leave it alone. Yura spent the rest of the day questioning traders from a dozen different species. The responses were always the same. The Vexians had administrative restrictions against entering human space. The Zoran merchants claimed their insurance wouldn't cover trips to that region. The crystalline traders simply refused to discuss the topic at all. What struck Yura most was not just the universal avoidance, but the fear in their voices. These were experienced spacers who dealt with dangerous cargo and hostile environments as part of their daily routine. They weren't easily intimidated, yet the mere mention of human territory made them nervous and evasive. Even more puzzling was how none of them could explain why they avoided the region. When pressed for details, they would change the subject, make excuses, or simply walk away. It was as if they all knew something terrible about human space, but had agreed never to talk about it. As Yura returned to her ship that evening, she realized her investigation had only deepened the mystery. Whatever secret surrounded human territory, it was big enough to influence trade policies across the entire galaxy. The conversations at Nexus Station had convinced Yura that the answers she needed weren't going to come from casual questioning. Whatever secret surrounded human space was protected by more than just fear and tradition. She needed to dig deeper, and that meant accessing information that wasn't meant for her eyes. Back at her home base on Vorthan Prime, Yura waited until the night shift when most of the archive staff had gone home. Her cartographer credentials gave her access to the standard databases, but what she needed was in the restricted section where the Galactic Council kept their most sensitive documents. Using her security clearance, she entered the archive building and made her way to the lower levels. The restricted section was guarded by automated security systems, but Yura had studied the building's layout during her years of routine research. She knew about the maintenance tunnels that connected to the archive's ventilation system. Crawling through the narrow tunnel took 20 minutes, but eventually she found herself inside the restricted archive room. Row upon row of sealed data storage units lined the walls, each one containing information that governments across the galaxy preferred to keep secret. Yura connected her portable computer to the archive's main system and began searching for anything related to first contact with humans. The search returned dozens of files, but most were heavily encrypted. She managed to access several lower security reports, though even these were partially censored with large sections blacked out. The first document she opened was a council meeting transcript from 51 years ago. Most of the text was redacted, but she could make out fragments of conversation between representatives from different species. Initial contact with species designation human was unprecedented response to our exploration vessels. The rest of the paragraph was blocked out, followed by recommend immediate withdrawal from Sector 7G. Another document appeared to be a military analysis report. Again, most of the content was censored, but scattered phrases remained visible. Defensive capabilities beyond current threat assessment models, and suggest revision of all first contact protocols. The most disturbing fragment came from what looked like an emergency council session transcript. 3 exploration fleets. Complete communication blackout. No survivors. The next several pages were completely blacked out except for a single line at the bottom. Motion to classify all human contact reports as Level 9 restricted, approved unanimously. Yura's hands trembled as she opened the next file. This one was labeled Final Determination Human Territory Status. Most of the document was censored, but the conclusion was partially readable. After extensive consultation with military advisors, xenobiologists and diplomatic specialists, the Council has reached the following determination regarding human territorial claims: immediate recognition of all claimed boundaries, no exploration or colonization attempts within designated zones, all trade and diplomatic contact to be suspended indefinitely. The final document in the series was the most chilling. It was a simple one-page memo dated 50 years ago, with most of the text removed, except for the header and final paragraph. Final Council Resolution. Human Space Protocols. Therefore, all member species of the Galactic Council hereby agree that human space shall remain off-limits indefinitely. No surveys, no trade missions, no diplomatic contact and no territorial expansion toward human boundaries shall be attempted by any council member. This resolution is to be treated as permanent and non-negotiable. Violation of this agreement will result in immediate expulsion from the Council and potential hostile action from all member species. The safety of the galaxy depends on maintaining this boundary. The document was signed by representatives from over 200 different species and civilizations. Yura sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. Whatever had happened during first contact with humans had been so serious that the entire galaxy had agreed to completely avoid them. The fragments she had found suggested some kind of military confrontation, but the details were locked away behind encryption she couldn't break. As she prepared to leave, alarms suddenly began blaring throughout the building. Security lights flashed red, and automated voices announced that unauthorized access had been detected in the restricted archives. Yura quickly disconnected her computer and crawled back through the maintenance tunnel as fast as she could. Behind her, she heard security doors sealing and guards rushing into the archive room. She barely made it out of the building before security forces surrounded the entire complex. After her close call with security at the archives, Yura knew she couldn't continue her investigation from Vorthon space. She needed to get away from her superiors and find a place where she could research without being watched. A remote science station called Deep Point seemed perfect. It was far from any major trade routes and primarily used by independent researchers studying cosmic phenomena. Deep Point was a small facility built into an asteroid with just enough life support for maybe 30 people. Most of the scientists there were working on projects that required isolation from electromagnetic interference and other space traffic. It was exactly the kind of place where someone could ask questions without attracting attention. Yura had been at Deep Point for 3 days, quietly reviewing her archived data, when something unexpected happened. 2 new researchers arrived on a small transport ship, and when she saw them in the station's common area, she almost couldn't believe her eyes. They were humans. In 50 years of galactic civilization, most species had never actually seen a human in person. They were like ghosts. Everyone knew they existed, but they stayed in their own territory and rarely traveled beyond their borders. Yet here were 2 of them, casually eating lunch and discussing quantum field measurements as if this were the most normal thing in the galaxy. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, with short black hair and friendly eyes. Her companion was a tall man with a quiet, thoughtful manner. Both wore simple research clothing, with name tags identifying them as Dr. Hana Kim and Dr. Minho Park. Yura approached their table nervously, unsure how to begin a conversation with members of the galaxy's most mysterious species. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Captain Yura, a cartographer from Vorthon. I couldn't help but notice. You're human, aren't you?" Dr. Hana looked up with a smile. Yes, that's right. I'm Hana and this is Minho. We're here studying dark matter fluctuations near the asteroid belt. Are you working on stellar mapping research? Her casual friendliness was completely unexpected. Based on everything Yura had learned, she had expected humans to be secretive, intimidating, or at least mysterious. Instead, they seemed perfectly normal. I am working on mapping projects, Yura said carefully, but I've encountered something puzzling. All of our galactic charts seem to end at the borders of human territory. There's no mapping data for your region at all. Minho and Hana exchanged glances, and Minho chuckled. Oh, that old issue. We've heard about it from the few traders who work near our borders. Honestly, we've never understood why it bothers people so much. You're not bothered that no one maps your territory? Why would we be? Hana asked, seeming genuinely confused. We prefer our privacy. There's plenty of galaxy for everyone to explore and settle. Why would anyone need detailed maps of our space when there are millions of other star systems available? Yura leaned forward. But doesn't it seem strange that every species in the galaxy avoids your territory completely? The traders I've spoken with seem genuinely afraid to enter human space. Minho shrugged. Different species have different comfort levels with neighbors, I suppose. We've always figured that if other civilizations wanted to visit, they would ask. Since no one has requested permission to enter our space, we assumed everyone was happy with the current arrangement. But what about trade, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation? We trade with border stations when we need something we can't produce ourselves, Hana explained. As for cultural exchange, well, we're here talking with you right now, aren't we? We participate in scientific conferences and share research data when it's relevant to galactic knowledge. Yura couldn't believe how normal they seemed. Everything she had discovered suggested that humans were some kind of terrifying threat that had forced the entire galaxy into submission. Yet these two researchers were talking about privacy preferences and trade policies as if they were discussing the weather. Can I ask you something directly, Yura said. What happened during first contact between humans and the rest of the galaxy? Why do all the government records about that time period get classified? Both humans looked genuinely puzzled. Minho scratched his head thoughtfully. First contact was pretty standard as far as we know. Some exploration ships from various species discovered our colonies. We had diplomatic meetings, established boundaries, and agreed on mutual non-interference. Nothing dramatic. The whole galaxy agreed to stay out of your territory permanently. That's not normal diplomatic protocol. Hana smiled. Well, we did ask for a lot of space. Humans like room to grow, and we had plans for expansion that would take centuries to complete. The other species were very understanding about giving us the territory we requested. Their innocent explanations only made the mystery deeper. Either these humans genuinely didn't know why their species was feared, or they were incredibly good at hiding the truth. The conversation with Minho and Hana had left Yura more confused than ever. Their innocent explanations didn't match the fear she had seen in traders' eyes or the heavily classified government documents. There had to be something else, something the humans either didn't know about or weren't telling her. She decided to dig deeper into galactic history, focusing on the time period around first contact with humans. If something significant had happened 50 years ago, there might be traces of it in historical records that weren't directly related to human contact reports. Using Deep Point's research databases, Yura began searching through old news archives, scientific journals, and historical documents from the past 60 years. She was looking for any major events that coincided with humanity's emergence on the galactic stage. At first, she found nothing unusual. The period, 50 to 60 years, ago, seemed relatively peaceful, with normal trade disputes, minor territorial conflicts, and the usual scientific discoveries. But then she stumbled across something that made her blood run cold. Buried in an old military history database was a series of reports about something called the Devourer Crisis. The documents were public records, not classified like the human contact files, but they had been archived so deeply that hardly anyone would think to look for them. The first report she opened was a distress call from the Zarian system, dated 52 years ago. Unknown vessels have entered our system. They're not responding to communication attempt. Oh gods, they're attacking the planets. They're consuming everything. The next document was from the Galactic Defense Command. The entities we have designated as Devourers have destroyed 17 star systems in the past month. Their technology appears to be designed for planetary consumption. They strip worlds of all organic and mineral resources, leaving behind empty husks. Yura's hands shook as she read report after report. The Devourers had been unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They weren't conquerors who wanted territory or resources for trade. They literally consumed entire worlds, turning thriving planets into lifeless rocks floating in space. The crisis had lasted for nearly 2 years. Every major military force in the galaxy had tried to stop them. The Centauri battle fleets, the Calorian defense networks, the combined might of the Galactic Council's emergency response forces, nothing had worked. The Devourers' ships seemed immune to conventional weapons, and their consumption of planets was accelerating. At the height of the crisis, the reports indicated that the Devourers were consuming an average of 3 planets per week. Entire civilizations were being wiped out, and the galaxy's military leaders were running out of options. Then, 50 years ago, the reports suddenly stopped. Yura found the final entry in the crisis records, dated exactly 50 years ago. It was a brief military bulletin. Devourer activity has ceased entirely. All remaining Devourer vessels appear to have withdrawn from known space. Cause of withdrawal unknown. All systems report no Devourer contact for 30 days. Crisis status reduced to monitoring level. That was it. No explanation for why the Devourers had stopped their consumption spree. No details about where they had gone. They had simply vanished from the galaxy as mysteriously as they had appeared. Yura cross-referenced the dates with her human contact research. The timing was impossible to ignore. The Devourers had disappeared at exactly the same time that humans had made first contact with galactic civilization. Within weeks of each other, she pulled up more historical records, looking for any connection between the two events. Most official histories treated them as separate incidents, the end of the Devourer threat and the beginning of diplomatic relations with humanity. But the timing was too perfect to be coincidental. In one obscure scientific journal, she found a paper written by a Vorthan xenobiologist about the rapid changes in galactic politics following the Devourer crisis. The author noted that the establishment of human territorial boundaries had happened with unprecedented speed and universal acceptance, which was unusual for galactic diplomacy. Another document mentioned that several species had requested immediate territorial recognition for humanity, even though humans had only just made contact with galactic civilization. For new species, territorial negotiations typically took decades. The pattern was becoming clear. Something had happened 50 years ago that connected the disappearance of the galaxy's greatest threat with the arrival of humanity. Every government in the galaxy knew what that connection was, but they had agreed to keep it secret. As Yura sat in the quiet darkness of Deep Point Station, surrounded by data that painted an increasingly disturbing picture, she realized that the mystery was much bigger than missing maps or trade restrictions. The entire galactic community was hiding the truth about what had really happened during those crucial weeks 50 years ago, and somehow humanity was at the center of it all. The connection between the Devourers and humanity's first contact was too important to ignore. Yura knew she needed physical evidence, something more concrete than archived reports and suspicious timing. Buried in the military records about the Devourer crisis, she had found coordinates for several locations where the final battles had taken place. Most of these coordinates were now empty space, showing no signs of the ancient conflict. But one set of coordinates was different. According to the records, it marked the location where the last Devourer ships had been detected before they vanished. If there were any clues about what had really happened, they would be there. Yura requisitioned a small scout ship from Deep Point's vehicle bay, claiming she needed to investigate an unusual gravitational anomaly for her mapping research. The coordinates were only a 2-day journey away, in a region of space that most charts labeled as uninteresting void. As she approached the coordinates, Yura's instruments detected something that shouldn't have been there. A small artificial structure was floating in the emptiness, too small to be a space station, but too large to be debris. Her ship's scanner identified it as some kind of beacon or warning device. As she got closer, the beacon suddenly activated. Her communication system crackled to life with an automated message broadcasting on all known frequencies. The message was being transmitted in dozens of different languages, cycling through each one every few minutes. "Warning," the message said in perfect Vorthon. "This region contains contained devourer technology and biological hazards. Access is restricted to authorized personnel only. Defensive systems are active. Approach at your own risk." The message, repeated in Centauri, then Calorian, then languages Yura didn't even recognize. But what shocked her most was the beacon's origin signature. According to her ship's computer, the device was of human manufacture. Yura maneuvered her ship closer to examine the beacon. It was unlike any human technology she had seen before. The design was sleek and advanced, using materials and energy systems that seemed far beyond what humans had shown during their brief interactions with galactic civilization. Her scanning equipment revealed that the beacon was incredibly old, approximately 50 years, matching exactly with the end of the Devourer crisis. But it was also incredibly sophisticated, with power systems that should have lasted only a few years, but were still functioning perfectly. The beacon wasn't just a warning device. Yura's deep scans revealed that it was connected to a much larger network of similar devices spread throughout the region in a carefully planned pattern. Each beacon was monitoring space for thousands of kilometers in all directions, creating an invisible web of surveillance that would detect any approaching ships. More disturbing was what her scans revealed about the defensive systems mentioned in the warning message. The beacon wasn't just broadcasting warnings, it was armed. Her instruments detected weapon systems unlike anything in current military databases, using technology that seemed to blend familiar galactic designs with something entirely different. When Yura tried to scan deeper into the beacon's systems, her computer suddenly shut down. Emergency backup systems activated, and warning lights flashed across her control panel. Something in the beacon had detected her scanning attempts and had sent a signal that overwhelmed her ship's electronic systems. As her systems slowly came back online, a new message appeared on her communication screen. This one wasn't the automated warning she had heard before. It was a direct communication, addressed specifically to her ship. "Unknown vessel, you are attempting unauthorized scans of quarantine equipment. This behavior is not permitted. Withdraw to minimum safe distance immediately, or defensive measures will be activated." The message was transmitted in perfect Vorthon, but there was something unsettling about its tone. It sounded almost human. Yura quickly moved her ship back to what she hoped was a safe distance. As she retreated, her scanners detected movement around the beacon. Additional devices were activating, emerging from what had appeared to be empty space. They had been there all along, hidden by some kind of advanced stealth technology. Within minutes, she found herself surrounded by a network of automated defense platforms, all of them tracking her ship's movement. The technology was incredible, far more advanced than anything she had seen from any galactic civilization. But according to her ship's computer, all of it was of human origin. As Yura set course back to Deep Point, her mind raced with questions. How had humans developed such advanced technology in only 50 years? Why were they maintaining a quarantine around the site of the last Devourer battle? And most importantly, what were they really guarding out there in the empty darkness of space? The beacon's warning had mentioned contained Devourer technology, but contained by whom? And for what purpose? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was more frightening than anything Yura had imagined. The encounter with the beacon had shaken Yura more than she wanted to admit. The advanced human technology, the quarantine warnings, and the defensive systems all pointed to something much bigger than she had originally suspected. She needed answers, and she needed them from someone who had been there when it all happened. After returning to Deep Point, Yura spent days researching the names on the old council documents she had found. Most of the officials who had signed the human territorial agreement were either dead or had disappeared from public records. But one name kept appearing in her searches: Councillor Keth, a Centauri diplomat who had been heavily involved in the crisis response 50 years ago, according to recent records. Keth was still alive but had retired from public service decades ago. He was now living in a medical facility on Centauri Prime, reportedly suffering from a terminal illness. If anyone knew the real truth about what had happened with the Devourers and humanity, it would be him. Getting to Centauri Prime required careful planning. Yura couldn't use official channels without alerting her superiors to her investigation. Instead, she booked passage on a civilian transport, claiming to be visiting family. The journey took 6 days, giving her plenty of time to prepare for what might be her only chance to learn the truth. The medical facility where Keth lived was a quiet place designed for elderly patients who needed long-term care. Yura posed as a researcher writing a historical paper about diplomatic achievements during the Devourer crisis. The staff, impressed by her credentials as a Vorthan cartographer, allowed her to visit the old counselor for an interview. Keth was much older than Yura had expected, with the frail appearance of someone who didn't have much time left. But his eyes were still sharp, and when she mentioned her research topic, his expression became immediately wary. "The Devourer crisis," he said slowly. "That's not something many people ask about anymore. Most prefer to forget those dark times." "I'm particularly interested in how the crisis ended," Yura said carefully. "The official records are somewhat unclear about the final resolution." Keth studied her for a long moment, then glanced around to make sure they were alone in his room. "You're the cartographer who's been asking questions about human space, aren't you?" Yura's heart skipped a beat. "How did you know? Word travels fast in government circles, even to retired old diplomats like me. You've made some powerful people very nervous with your investigation. Then you know why I'm here." Keth nodded slowly. "I've been expecting someone like you for years, someone who would eventually piece together enough clues to start asking the right questions." He paused, breathing heavily. "I'm dying, you know. Cancer. Maybe it's time someone finally knew the truth. What really happened 50 years ago?" The old counselor closed his eyes as if gathering strength for what he was about to say. "The Devourers were unstoppable. We threw everything we had at them, our best ships, our most advanced weapons, our brightest military minds. Nothing worked. They consumed planets faster than we could evacuate them. But they stopped. The reports say they just disappeared." "They didn't disappear," Keth said quietly. "They were stopped. By the humans." Yura leaned forward. "How?" "Humans had just made first contact. They didn't have the military technology to fight the Devourers. That's what we thought too." Keth's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "But we were wrong about what humans were capable of. When the Devourers entered human space, expecting to find easy prey, something incredible happened. The humans didn't just fight back. They won completely and utterly. But how? We never found out exactly how they did it. What we know is that within 2 weeks of the Devourers entering human territory, every single Devourer ship had been destroyed or captured, not damaged, not driven away. Completely eliminated." Yura felt a chill run down her spine. "Captured?" "That's when we realized the truth," Keth continued. "Humans hadn't just defeated the Devourers. They had studied them, learned from them, and absorbed their technology. When our diplomatic teams finally made contact, we discovered that humans had reverse-engineered Devourer weapons, energy systems, and even their world consumption techniques." "The quarantine," Yura whispered. "The quarantine isn't to protect the galaxy from Devourer remnants," Keth said, his voice filled with old fear. "It's to protect the galaxy from humans. We realized that any species capable of not just defeating the Devourers but mastering their technology was potentially more dangerous than the Devourers themselves. But the humans I met seemed so normal, so peaceful." Keth smiled sadly. "That's what makes them truly terrifying. They're not monsters. They're not conquerors. They're just efficient. When they saw the Devourers consuming worlds, they solved the problem completely and permanently. When we asked them to accept territorial boundaries, they agreed without argument. When we suggested the quarantine, they went along with it. So the entire galaxy agreed to stay away from human space because we're afraid," Keth finished. afraid of what they might do if they ever decided that the rest of us were a problem that needed to be solved. The room fell silent except for the sound of Keith's labored breathing. Finally, Yura asked the question that had been building in her mind. "Are they still out there, using Devourer technology?" Keth nodded weakly. "The beacons you found are just the beginning. According to our intelligence reports, they've built installations throughout their territory using adapted Devourer technology. They're not just guarding against the return of the Devourers. They're making sure that nothing like the Devourers ever threatens the galaxy again. They're protecting us. In their own way, yes, but that's what makes them so dangerous. They've appointed themselves as the galaxy's guardians, and we have no say in how they choose to guard us." Keth's revelation had changed everything. The quarantine wasn't about containing some ancient threat. It was about containing humanity itself. But Yura needed to see with her own eyes what humans were really doing in their isolated territory. The old counselor's words painted a picture of a species that had become something beyond normal galactic civilization, and she had to know if that was true. Getting into human space would be nearly impossible through official channels. The quarantine beacons she had encountered were just the outer layer of what was obviously a sophisticated security system. But Yura had spent 20 years mapping the galaxy's hidden corners, and she knew that every security system had gaps. Studied the beacon network's positioning data for weeks, looking for patterns and weaknesses. Finally, she found what she was looking for: a small corridor between two beacon clusters where the sensor coverage overlapped but didn't quite meet. It would require precise navigation and a ship small enough to avoid detection, but it was possible. Using her savings, Yura purchased a tiny courier vessel designed for stealth operations. The ship was barely large enough for one person and had minimal life support, but its advanced cloaking systems could hide it from most scanning equipment. If she was careful and lucky, she might be able to slip past the quarantine line. The infiltration took 3 days of careful maneuvering through the sensor gap. Yura had to shut down all non-essential systems and drift through most of the journey to avoid detection. When she finally crossed into human territory, she held her breath, waiting for alarms or defensive systems to activate. Nothing happened. She was inside. What Yura found in human space was unlike anything she had expected. Instead of the normal mix of planets, space stations, and shipping lanes that characterized most civilized regions, human territory was dominated by massive artificial structures that dwarfed anything she had ever seen. The first installation she encountered was built around what had once been a small moon. The entire celestial body had been transformed into a technological complex, with geometric patterns of machinery covering its surface. Energy readings from the structure were off the charts. It was consuming and generating power on a scale that seemed impossible. As she moved deeper into human space, Yura discovered that these installations were everywhere. Some were built on asteroids, others floated freely in space, and the largest ones had been constructed around entire planets. All of them shared the same characteristic. They used technology that was clearly not of human origin. The designs were a disturbing blend of familiar human engineering and something else entirely. The something else, Yura realized with growing horror, was Devourer technology. The installations were using the same energy patterns and structural principles that the ancient world killers had employed to consume planets. But instead of destruction, the humans had repurposed the technology for construction and defense. The installations were connected by a network of energy beams that created a web spanning the entire human territory. It was a detection and response system that could monitor every cubic meter of space within human borders and respond to threats instantly. Yura managed to get close enough to one of the smaller installations to use her ship's long-range scanners. What she saw made her hands shake as she recorded the data. The facility was staffed by human scientists and technicians who were working with machinery that shouldn't have existed. Through her scanner's visual feed, she could see 2 humans in particular who seemed to be supervising the main operations center. A woman named Sora was monitoring energy flow displays that showed the status of dozens of installations throughout the region. Her colleague Taiho was working with what appeared to be weapons systems of incredible power. Both of them moved with the casual efficiency of people who had been doing this work for years. This wasn't some secret military project hidden from the general human population. This was their normal, everyday life. As Yura continued her surveillance, she began to understand the true scope of what humans had built. The installations weren't just monitoring human space. They were watching the entire galaxy. The network could detect ships, energy signatures, and even communication patterns from thousands of light years away. More frightening was the realization that the network was designed to respond to threats automatically. If something like the Devourers ever appeared again, the human installations could detect them instantly and deploy countermeasures without any need for consultation with galactic authorities. The humans had turned themselves into the galaxy's immune system, using the weapons of their greatest enemy to guard against future threats. But they had done it in complete isolation, without asking permission or explaining their actions to anyone else. Watching Sora and Taiho work, Yura saw something in their expressions that made her understand why humans had accepted the quarantine so easily. They looked tired, burdened by responsibility that never ended. They were spending their lives maintaining defenses against threats that might never come, accepting exile from galactic society as the price of keeping everyone safe. They weren't conquerors or monsters, they were guardians who had sacrificed their own integration with galactic civilization to protect it from the darkness beyond the stars. But as Yura prepared to leave human space with her evidence, she realized that this sacrifice might be the most frightening thing of all. A species that could shoulder such responsibility without complaint was capable of making decisions that would affect the entire galaxy without asking anyone's opinion. The question wasn't whether humans were protecting the galaxy. The question was whether the galaxy had any choice in how it was being protected. Returning from human space, Yura carried with her the weight of knowledge that could change the galaxy forever. She had seen the truth behind 50 years of fear and isolation. Humans weren't the threat that governments believed them to be. They were protectors who had accepted exile to keep everyone safe from dangers beyond imagination. But Yura also understood why the secret had been kept for so long. The revelation that humans possessed Devourer technology and had built a galaxy-spanning defense network would terrify most species. Even knowing that humans were using this power to protect rather than conquer, the sheer scale of their capabilities would likely cause panic. She spent weeks considering her options. She could release all her evidence publicly, forcing the galactic community to confront the truth about humanity's role as guardians. But that would likely result in even greater fear and possibly military action against human territory. The cure might be worse than the disease. Alternatively, she could simply keep the secret, allowing the current situation to continue indefinitely. But that seemed wrong too. Humans were sacrificing their place in galactic society to protect species that feared and avoided them. That isolation had to be taking a psychological toll on their entire civilization. Finally, Yura decided on a third path. Instead of dramatic revelations or continued secrecy, she would work quietly to gradually change the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. It would take time, but perhaps she could help bridge the gap that fear had created. Her first step was returning to her position as a cartographer, with a new understanding of her role. When she submitted her report about the Outer Rim survey, she included recommendations for new trade routes that would coincidentally pass closer to human territory than previous shipping lanes. The routes would still respect the quarantine boundaries, but they would bring regular galactic traffic within communication range of human border stations. Over the following months, Yura used her expertise to influence mapping decisions across the Vorten Stellar Cartography Department. She suggested survey missions in regions adjacent to human space, claiming they showed promising mineral deposits or navigational advantages. Each mission brought galactic explorers a little closer to human territory. More importantly, Yura began reaching out to the traders she had met at Nexus Station. She couldn't tell them the whole truth, but she could plant seeds of curiosity about the economic opportunities that might exist near human borders. She shared carefully edited data, suggesting that the region around human space was rich in rare elements and energy sources. Jorik, the Calorian trader, who had been so frightened of human territory, was the first to take the bait. When Ura suggested that his navigation equipment might find good markets near the quarantine zone, he initially refused. But after several conversations and some financial incentives, he agreed to establish a small trading post just outside human space. The trading post was a success. Human border stations proved eager to exchange rare materials and advanced technology for goods they couldn't produce in isolation. The humans were fair, honest, and surprisingly generous in their dealings. Word spread quickly among the trading community that the fearsome humans were actually excellent business partners. Within a year, dozens of trading posts had sprung up along the human border. The economic activity attracted the attention of several galactic corporations, who began lobbying their governments to relax some of the restrictions on approaching human territory. Ura's most important breakthrough came when she arranged for Dr. Hana and Dr. Minho, the human researchers she had met at Deep Point, to present their scientific findings at a major galactic conference. Their research on quantum field fluctuations was groundbreaking, and their presentation was met with enthusiasm from scientists across the galaxy. For the first time in 50 years, humans were being seen as contributors to galactic knowledge, rather than mysterious threats to be avoided. The scientific community began calling for increased cooperation with human researchers, arguing that their isolation was slowing progress in critical fields of study. The political changes were slower, but equally important. As trade relationships developed and scientific cooperation increased, several species began questioning the logic of complete isolation from such obviously advanced and peaceful neighbors. The Calorian government was the first to officially request permission to establish formal diplomatic contact with human colonies. Ura watched these developments with satisfaction, knowing that she was witnessing the beginning of the end of humanity's isolation. The process would take decades to complete, but the foundation was being laid for a new relationship between humans and the galaxy they protected. The maps still ended at human space, but now they ended with dotted lines, marked restricted access, rather than solid barriers marked no entry. Trade routes curved closer to human borders, and communication channels that had been silent for 50 years were slowly opening again. Most importantly, a new generation of galactic citizens was growing up seeing humans as mysterious but beneficial neighbors rather than existential threats. In time, perhaps the full truth about humanity's role as the galaxy's guardians could be revealed without causing panic. Ura's investigation had begun with a simple question about missing maps. It ended with her becoming an architect of humanity's gradual return to galactic society. The boundaries were softening, one carefully planned step at a time.